the Wednesday, January 15th, 2020 meeting of the Ames Planning and Zoning Commission. Introduction of commission members.
Anupit Manhas. Ruth Holstrom.
John Emery.
Matt Converse.
Carol Spencer.
Doug Regaller.
Carlton Basmagian.
So we have an agenda in front of us. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve tonight's agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Passes. Whoops. Crossed the wrong one off. All right, approval of minutes from November 20th, 2019. Any additions or corrections to those minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of November 20th, 2019. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstains?
I guess that's both of us.
Motion passes. Public forum. If anybody has anything they'd like to speak on tonight that's not on tonight's agenda, now is the time for that. Seeing none. Public hearing, item 6, public hearing for the rezone of 2800 East 13th.
Good evening. So this is the map that's in your packet, but just to put it on the screen to make it easier. This item is for the rezone of 2 tracks that are located at 2800 East 13th Street. At the time of annexation and when they were brought into the city, they were automatically rezoned agriculture, and they've retained that zoning since that time. Danfoss owns the property that is now including these 2 tracks and would like to utilize the property. So they are the ones requesting the rezone to GI. It equals 2.95 acres. It's pretty cut and dried. It's just that they never were rezoned, and now the applicant that owns them would like to have them with the same zoning as the rest of his tract. Are there any questions?
It's part of the on-ramp.
Well, that's part of the right-of-way. That's just how the zoning goes to the center of the right-of-way in every case. So it would automatically go to the center of the right-of-way when it's rezoned. So planning recommends alternative 1, which is to rezone the 2 tracks that total 2.95 acres located at 2800 East 13th Street from agricultural to general industrial.
Are there any questions at this time? Would the applicant like to come forward and speak on this?
I'm Scott Williams with Fox Engineering, and I'm here representing Danfoss. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Again, we think this is an action that's kind of catching up what's already taken place. Those parcels through a plat survey action were already combined with the larger parcel now. So this will bring the zoning more in line with what the parcel lines actually reflect.
Any questions for Scott? Thanks. Any discussion?
I say this just seems like a cleanup kind of situation. So
Somebody want to make a motion?
I'll go ahead and recommend that the city council approve the request to rezone the 2 tracks totaling 2.95 acres located at 2800 East 13th Street from A, agricultural to GI, general industrial.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Alternative 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
So this will move on to the city council as a notice public hearing as well. Can you hand me one of those agenda papers? No, the agenda paper next to you.
Pardon?
Can you hand me that piece of paper next?
The agenda?
Yes. So I assume we're going to move on to item number 7.
We are going to go on. to
Zoning
item
text
number 7.
amendment. So I'm going to present that tonight for Ray, who was one that prepared this. One of our work plan items was to do some minor code cleanup, give a chance for staff to recommend some efficiencies or make sure that some of our standards are reflecting what we're seeing through development review. One thing that we wanted to bring up is a couple of things related to front yards. We have some exceptions to front yard setbacks. We're going to bring a broader package of different issues that all affect a front yard, but we thought the garbage collection container area requirement was kind of distinct from the rest of those. I'm going to walk through that tonight. So later, probably in February, we'll bring some other things regarding porches and some other minor issues that kind of affect individual homeowners or individual properties kind of uniquely, but it does repeatedly come up, and we'll get some direction from you on how to address that. But tonight with garbage collection areas, what we've seen probably in the last year, maybe year and a half, with the redevelopment of sites that essentially have corner lots or maybe 3 frontages, it's very difficult how our code is written in applying the layers of standards to get the result that's intended. So the very basic intent of our zoning ordinance is that garbage collection areas must be screened, a very normal standard. However, it goes about requiring that by using fence standards or landscape standards. When you apply fence standards, there's restrictions on how high fences can be in front yards. And as we noted in the report, you're typically restricted to 4 feet. And most dumpster enclosures need to be bigger than 4 feet or taller than 4 feet. And we as staff, although landscaping is allowed, is generally not the best solution for that. So we don't advise applicants to approach it trying to plan for shrubbery to be successful in screening and then end up with a zoning violation at some point in the future, because that doesn't work. So what we're recommending is, we also don't want to encourage these to be the front feature of a site. I don't think anybody thinks the most attractive site is the one that they see the garbage enclosure first as they're approaching the building. So we're trying to balance a couple of different things here. What we're proposing is that we allow for garbage enclosures to not be in the front setback, but to be able to be between the building and the street. However, to do that, you must incorporate design elements and building materials that are reflective of the overall aesthetic of the project. Currently, all we require is an opaque screening requirement. It doesn't have any design requirements. There's no finishing requirements. It's just that you've screened the structure. So if someone does not want to put extra care into how they design the enclosure, they can default back to the current standard. They can put it in the rear of their property. They can put it in a side yard. They can do something the way we do it now. But if they need to or want to pull it forward on a site, I think we can allow for that, but we want to have higher design expectations. And I can give you a couple of examples of 2 projects that you looked at this last summer that if staff was reviewing them, they would not have been able to be approved. So 2 examples would have been the buildings out at the North Grand Mall. So you had the 7,000 square foot multi-tenant building in front of the JCPenney's. Because that was an adaptive reuse permit, you could waive setbacks. The setback in that zone was 50 feet. The trash enclosure was set back about 20 feet from the road because it was situated near one of the driveways away from the building, but you had multiple locations where you had front yard setbacks. It would have been very difficult to put that there if staff was reviewing it. It was approved. It included a little bit higher design grade materials to reflect the building, and that was one that was approved. The other one was Bebop's. If you remember that, they had not necessarily a corner lot when you think about the Bebop site, but the whole property was really the site at the time you were approving that. It wasn't its own lot. So again, putting that structure in the front yard would have been in front of Kohl's all the way out to the street. So you can see how a setback issue and a front yard kind of mix there. So again, they didn't meet setbacks because it was 10 feet from the property line. But we all agreed through that process that to allow for that building to be built there, the best location was in the place that got situated behind the old Swift stop, or the Swift stop that's there. This standard doesn't quite get to that. It would still require that 25-foot setback rather than 10, but it would at least accommodate ways to get these enclosures, if necessary, into areas when you're redeveloping that you don't really have space to do anything else with, or it is part of the site plan in a way that to accommodate them. We've also had this come up on a couple of 3 and 4 street frontage lots. We had the Fairway site that was dealt with in a little bit different manner. That's a 4-sided site. Everything's a front yard. It's come up on the Scooter site, which is again 4 streets, 4 front yards. It's these things start to come up in unique conditions. So I think what we're looking for from the commission is whether you believe changing the terminology a little bit. We want to also be inclusive of recycling materials as well. That's recycling materials are not trash. So arguably they didn't need to be screened, but clearly they're the same kind of containers. So it makes sense to incorporate that definition at this point. And we would like to add the option of locating it in commercial zones only, which is important, not in residential, in commercial zones only, in the front yard, but outside the front setback. So I hope that kind of paints the full picture of what we've been seeing for the last year. And I think we're really just giving a better option to people. And if people aren't interested in that, they can default to the current code. Any questions on
I have a
that?
quick question for you,
Yep.
Kelly. If you look at 3A2, the very last sentence on that design and materials section says that the enclosure shall provide a screen to prevent view of trash and refuse, including trash and recycling containers, from all public rights of way other than alleys and from adjacent properties. Was there any discussion on if the adjacent property is residential use? Would it be of value to screen a trash enclosure from view if the adjacent property is residential?
It is intended to be screened from adjacent properties. So
Okay.
with that series of commas, I could see why you would
Okay.
say what you're saying. It's meant to say that you must screen it from all
Okay.
rights of ways and adjacent properties. The only exclusion is from alleys.
Yeah.
So that's how it's meant to be understood. So this won't necessarily be the final wording. This was kind of the most words we could probably come up with. But when we get to legal, we'll go through it with a little bit finer tooth comb and make sure that's clear. But our intent is to screen from both properties and rights of way.
Kelly, I'm just curious, when it says, same paragraph, but it says shall be durable, is that per kind of staff assessment, and is there a definition in terms?
There's not a definition of durable. I'm trying to see where it says that in there.
It's up above where?
Materials, the second sentence, materials.
Front yards,
Line
outside street,
4.
adult architectural materials, colors. It's in 2? I'm just, oh, there. it is,
Two, yeah,
actually.
yep.
Okay, materials used. Yeah, so what we rely upon that is there's 2 ways that we avoid chain link with slats. One of them is we require 100% screening, and we don't believe chain link with slats accomplishes that. The durable materials would also be inserts into a chain link fence would not be deemed a durable material over time. So
Okay.
it doesn't mean any more than that it has some idea that it's going to stand up to the wear and tear of its use. If you pay attention to these things, you'll see that a lot of times the gates, if they're poorly constructed or cheaply constructed, they fall apart in about 8 weeks. And then we get complaints about why do you require me to screen it? I would say, why didn't you build a better gate? But those are the things that we want to make sure is that the enclosure doesn't fall apart in the first 6 months just because it was cheaply constructed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I just was curious about what.
It's not a defined term. It's just meant to be more of a permanent material, not something that's temporary.
Right.
I think in the Bebop's discussion, the question came back, is this a pressure treated wood product? And they said, no, we're using more like a recycled plastic kind of composite material board, which would be more durable and have a little bit nicer aesthetic to it. So that's not defined, but that's mostly the intent here. Is it used, again, if you have to match the aesthetic of the principal building, you're probably not using pressure treated wood as your siding or something. So you should be incorporating a little bit nicer materials.
Okay.
canvas and things of those nature would not be considered durable.
Snow fence,
Snow fence would not be opaque, hopefully.
couple layers.
Yeah, a couple layers. Just wrap the dumpster with it.
Yeah.
Put a bow on top.
Couple rows of corn.
Somebody try it.
So if there's any other questions, we look for recommendation. We offered another alternative. I don't think we think it would be the best choice. We could minimize the fence standards. It would be simplistic, but I don't think it accomplishes all of the goals that we're trying to accomplish here.
So Kelly, let me understand this. So right now, the way you feel like the code is written, essentially the code as it pertains to fences in the front yard is conflicting essentially with the standards for the trash enclosure in the
Yeah,
front
so
yard.
two competing interests. One says screen it, the other one says
It can't be
you
tall.
could only screen it if it's less than 4 feet tall. And that's
Okay.
very rarely the dumpster size.
So there's no way to just, I guess, under kind of the fencing, kind of create like a subsection that just kind of leaves trash enclosure fencing out.
We could, but then since we have no design guidelines in
It's not a-
hardly any commercial zones, then you would end up with the allowance for a fairly, more than likely a fairly large product. So we thought the better answer was to add design requirements if in the front yard.
Okay.
But if that's considered too much, we could definitely do what you said and write an exclusion.
And staff reviews material and stuff beforehand.
So when you submit for a site development plan, you have to provide both the 2D site plan, elevations of the building and elevations of any structure, and identify materials that are going to be used on the project.
Okay.
Some zones have specific materials you have to use. Most do not. Like HOC doesn't have any materiality requirements.
I'm just saying that you will look, staff.
Staff would see it, yes. Yeah. Yep. You would have to show us where you're going to put a trash container. If you said it was going to be inside, that's the end of the conversation. But if you're going to put it outside, then you have to give us a full detail on that.
Any other questions for Kelly? I care to venture a motion?
I'll make a motion that accept alternative number 1, Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the city council adopt proposed text amendments for trash and recycling collection areas in commercial zones.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, alternative 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Passes.
Like I said, the next one we come with is going to be kind of a hodgepodge of things. And you'll probably want to think about what some of those allowances mean for better or worse. But it's things that it would be helpful to staff to have cleaner guidance on. It's something people can argue or dispute what's the meaning of it. It's just not worth the energy. It'd be better just to define it for everybody. So we're going to talk about.
But they'll be separated.
They all relate to the same section, but there's going to be about 5 different things related to front yard setbacks. It's going to relate to ATMs. It's going to relate to porches, landings, things that are not big issues, but they pop up every now and then.
But they'll be separate so we can vote on
Yeah,
each.
Yeah, I mean, they all fight the same section, so you can pick if you like or dislike the allowances that are proposed. Okay, so you'll probably see that. As you notice, we didn't give you a February 5th agenda. We're trying not to have that meeting because it's one that you get put into conference room 135 if you have the meeting, because council's in here that night for a budget meeting. So we're trying to avoid that one. So we might not see it till the middle of February. Okay.
Item 8, Ames Plan 2040 update.
So item 8, you guys have not met for a while, and quite a bit has transpired since we last met to talk about Ames Plan 2040. What we gave you a reference in the packet was a presentation that was made available to the city council on December 19th. I don't plan to walk through all of that. I was hoping if you were interested in seeing what that was about in more detail, you would go through it. We spent an hour and a half going through every page with council. If that's what the commission wants to do, you can tell me you want to do that at the next meeting or tonight. But I think what I wanted to do was give you this overview Council is still in the process of seeking public input on what to do with this information. So what this is focused on was this scenario task that was really started back in July. I gave you an overview back in the summer that RDG was tasked with putting 15,000 people in 4 different distinct areas so that we could measure the result of that. So this is the graphic that RDG has been working since July. So all told, that's over 60,000 people. And what Plan 2040 is focused on is 15,000. And we did this on purpose so you could see really distinct differences about how growth affects the community, how growth would work in certain areas. It wasn't meant to be that this is the only way to grow. It wasn't meant to be that one direction is it could be one direction is preferred. It could be multiple directions that are viable depending on how the outcome of this went. So what we were able to do was analyze traffic, water, sewer, public safety, mostly the fire department response, and identify what were some of those issues that went into servicing these areas over time, and then also looking at those estimated costs. And then what we moved to as the data started to come together, and in conversations with City Council, it became clear that just thinking in lump sums of 15,000 people, it was probably too coarse. So we ended up breaking down each of the areas into what we ended up calling tiers, so that you could start to grapple with this idea that some parts of each one of them were easier or cheaper or more desirable to probably build out than others. So we didn't change any of the land use description. We didn't change the red or the yellows or the oranges. What we did was break up each of those into their ability to be served by utilities and infrastructure. And then we assigned cost to each tier. So I've just thrown this out there. Let's say scenario 1 needed $105 million to build out everything. Well, maybe it's not worth $105 million to get the last few thousand people. What would be a meaningful component is a tier 1 that's much more affordable, or maybe plan out for a tier 2 or 3 that would take more time. So this is kind of where we're at right now with City Council, is really kind of focusing on this graphic. It is not meant to say that you have to pick south, or you have to pick west or east or north. You can, and what we're expecting is that the final recommendation is, what are the preferences for different parts of these areas? Maybe one is just left out, maybe 2 of them are just left out, but there's more than likely that parts of each of these could get put into the plan. Later on in the presentation, when you start to look at all the tiers, RDG, to try and spur thought, put together different combinations of tier 1 this, or tier 2 and 3 plus this tier 1. All of it, again, trying to focus on 15,000 people being at least the result of the plan. And if you want to go back and look at any one of them in any more specificity, that's fine. So if you go back one slide. So on this slide, what RDG tried to do was give you that estimate of how many people could be served in each of those tiers. So let's take the north growth area. The blue, at the density plan that RDG drew, which is yet to still be determined if that would be the final plan, 5,000 people could fit there. What the thick lines represent on this particular graph are the major roadway improvements needed that correspond to the tier. So you can see if with like north growth again, there's high bolded blue areas for GW Carver and Hyde Avenue, indicating that even if you just did the blue, add those 5,000 people, there's traffic issues on those 2 roads. And then you can see where purple would get triggered if you build out north of 190th Street, where major upgrades are necessary, and so on and so on for each of these areas. It gives you an idea of what needs to happen in some element of sequencing as growth, if growth occurred in the way that it's represented here by these colors. So later on, our RDG, again, took these population estimates and started to package things up to get to that 15,000. And one of the comments that has come out of this is, well, how are we supposed to consider infill in this conversation? So it's important to remember that this was a task to evaluate the outcome of growth. It was not meant to say this is the growth. And what we've told city council is that infill did not affect that 15,000. That was an exercise to understand 15,000 people. We understand that some infill would happen over time, and we weren't asked to find the best place to fit 15,000 people. We were asked, what is the result of growing by 15,000 people? So what we've said is that infill should be looked at as additive to this because it is unpredictable. So we can set policy and we can support infill through incentives and zoning and things of that nature. But because of the complications of seeing that happen, it's much less predictable. And if the city wants to accommodate its goals for housing development and growth for the community to serve a population increase, we've said that you need to look at that as both expansion and infill options, not one or the other, or one has to happen first before the other. We would like to see both happen concurrently over time. So in reality, depending again on how the recommendations come out, we think that we're going to be showing the option for at least 15,000 people being added to the perimeter of the city, probably, and we haven't calculated this because we don't have policies exactly on what infill means, another couple thousand people that would probably fit within infill options that we could identify in the city, or maybe 1,000 to 1,500 people. So all told, you're looking at a population that could be served of in excess of 15,000, but probably less than 20,000. And we will not grow at that rate. There will not be 20,000 people added to Ames in the next 20 years. That's a growth rate that's way beyond what we expect, but it would be a capacity that gives you some flexibility. One thing we want to be concerned about is kind of a tight land market where there's only one way to do it. It makes it very tight, makes it inflexible. So one of the things that we're advocating for is to not just plan for 15,000 people, but to plan for how these places will develop, not maybe in the next 20, but also through the next 20 after that. So our position is that just picking the smallest number possible does not help us meet our other goals of ensuring that we're designing places that are going to be successful in the long run. The smaller the number we pick to focus on, the more it's just subdivision review rather than planning for a place or new destinations or new areas of the city that will thrive over time with the addition of commercial and jobs and people. So for example, if we just, it's a reasonable thing to do is to focus on what's easiest, but it really takes the planning out of it if you're trying to say, well, this might happen now, but it needs to match up with what's going to happen in the long run. We are not very focused on the 15,000 as the target. We're more focused on making sure at least that number can be served, but as a result, what places will be created for those people when they get here. So once we have the geography set, our DG will be tasked to go back and reevaluate those land use mixes that are depicted in the first graphic and say, okay, well, if I'm only going to be able to work in this many acres of land, here's the way that we think would be a reasonable expectation to see that built out. So let's say you pick the South. The South overall really focused on a nodal center with that new road kind of going east-west through the middle. Well, the heart of that growth area, as you can see, is tier 2 and tier 3. So tier 3 is really far out there. So if we decide that South growth is a good thing, obviously tier 1 would be picked. But in the way RDG drew that area to start with, there wasn't anything of substance in the blue area. It was in those later tiers. So if the city council or the direction is no, we don't really want to look at 2 and 3 down there, it's going to behoove RDG to kind of maybe reevaluate housing choices that would go in the blue, not just assume the low density, look at what else could happen. So there's going to be an iterative exercise here between the geography and now the land use and housing choices that would come back after the geography is selected. So I think that's kind of the really broad overview of what we're trying to accomplish. We had this all started back in July, so it's been a while coming. We spent a lot of time on the technical side. The city's water and sewer models needed some help getting up to date so that we were getting accurate information. We also did some traffic modeling, having to work on that to make sure that was reflective of the conditions that we were predicting in this scenario. So we spent quite a bit of time on the technical side to make sure that what we were showing people was realistic, and being able to assign a cost estimate was a significant thing to it. Not just telling you, well, this will be a 4-lane road in the future, but, well, a 4-lane road costs this much. And one thing we've underscored to council repeatedly is those cost estimates should not in any way be viewed as a city cost. Those are just the costs of the major infrastructure needed to serve a project. How much of that is borne by a developer? A substantial portion to maybe the majority, probably over the majority would be borne by a developer. The city might be asked to step in to fill gaps, to make extensions that allow for things to happen. There's ways that the city may or may not choose to do that or recoup those costs. But it was very important not to say, okay, growth costs the city $100 million. That would be a false statement. It would be something much less than that. And obviously that would only be at the time development was happening, where we would start to look at that from a CIP perspective. But it does help you get a sense of what's the magnitude necessary to serve these areas. If you say one road improvement costs 30 million, another costs 6, to understand where your investments go. And one of the results of this exercise was, and we suspected this would be the outcome, no one area is ready to go for the long term. There are major infrastructure, whether it's a sewer or a road or both, for everything. So it's kind of equal territory for all of the discussion. There isn't one place that's clearly, it would have been great maybe if we'd come out with this and said, oh, this one's 20% of the cost of all the others. It's clearly the best choice, but that is not the result of the analysis to date.
So,
Yeah.
So the cost estimates are based basically on roads and sewers. Are those the two?
Water, sewer, roads, and in some cases, a fire station.
In some cases, a fire station.
Not all scenarios triggered a fire station.
Okay. And so they added all that up and said, okay, this total package would be whatever.
Yeah, so we have a slide that puts them all up on one. So you can get all the details about what went into all these assumptions if you're interested, but here's kind of the summary of it all. The West is always a little confusing because the West has that middle triangle overlaps into kind of an A and a B. So the triangle happens whether you go north of Highway 30 or south of Highway 30. So it just looks a little different every time we do the West. It's the only one like that has kind of a crossover piece that we think is important regardless.
And these are, is there a sort of a time built into this, or are these 2020 numbers? This is not
it's
inflation adjusted.
There's no inflation. It's assuming if you all built it all today, it would cost
At
this.
one time. Okay.
Yep.
So in reality, the cost would be significantly more than this on every scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the relative cost would be consistent.
Right.
And a majority of the cost is borne by the project.
It should be, even if you didn't change city policy in any meaningful way about how development occurs. Improvements occur so that you can build, and those are looked at as a development obligation in Ames.
Probably with the exception of a fire station.
That and some of some things like an interchange is not going to be borne by development. So when you look at east growth, south growth, it's kind of those off-site projects that are substantial. Traditionally, Ames has not had a way to necessarily capture those costs because they have maybe a regional or other benefit beyond the developer. Those are the kinds of things I think you have to be cognizant of as a city board member, as a city council member. Those are the things that are probably get viewed as fixes by the city that maybe a developer is not going to fix. Like, for example, in North Growth, Riverside Drive, which is a county road, we're never going to annex it. It shows substantial traffic increases because the people from the north have to get out to the north. Grand Avenue's full. That diverts you to Riverside. It needs to be upgraded. It's not even in the city. So who would really bear that cost? Would it be the city? Unlikely. Would it be the county? Maybe reluctantly. But at the end of the day, the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, is the transportation agency. They're the ones that may have the checkbook, which is the city and the county. So it would affect the city financing of what other projects maybe that could be done. So those are the kinds of things I don't think the developer pays for. But if it's in the project or abutting the project, those are likely assigned to the developer.
What kinds of conversations, if any, with these overlays with the public schools and new demand for public schools in the next 20 years?
So Eloise and I have met with 5 districts. Yeah, there's 5 districts affected
Okay.
by these. We met with 4 of the 5. We've reached out to all of them. School districts don't think like this. They don't worry about 2040.
They
They're
wait till
more
it's
like,
here.
is there a subdivision next year? Call me. I can deal with those students
Okay.
and what age they are now. So for the most part, they're interested about what does this mean, but it doesn't trigger, nothing's gonna, even if you adopted this tomorrow, no meaningful projects happening in the next year. I think for Ames School District, they're doing a facility analysis right now. United thought it was a great time. The United's to the west of Ames with Boone. They're looking at doing a facility analysis this year. So they were very interested in understanding if the city thought thousands of houses would be in Boone County and in the city and in their district. That's a big change for them. Ballard, their tier 3 land is in Ballard. That's not something that's on the forefront of their mind. Same with the Nevada School District in the east. There's no pending project. So to think out what does that mean for them in the long run, it was really hard for them.
Okay.
I think we won't have control over this, but one thing I think that the city will want to reach out to a district about is all of these areas are very large. You can get lost in how much land is really shown here. I think one of our problems that we have in thinking about neighborhoods is because we have these split districts, we don't necessarily end up with the school footprints in the city.
Yeah.
And I think that if we're growing at this level, this many people, we should push hard for districts to think about schools in Ames, at least in elementary school. And you're not going to build 2 high schools, but I think we as the city should look at that as a policy to see what we can do about helping a district get a school situated in a large development area. We obviously would never control that, but I think we can have some positive statements about that and support that in different ways.
Talking about Gilbert.
Thank you.
I'm talking about all of them. I mean, I doubt Ballard would do that. That's probably not enough. But if you think about 15,000 people in the Nevada School District, they don't have facilities for that. So they're gonna have to build something. United is an obvious one. They have one facility. They don't have that. So it's a big question for all of them.
Thank you.
And obviously, at some point, Gilbert's schools, again, no one can support 15,000 people. Nobody has that right now.
Okay.
So what's the council's next step with this?
So what we've done, so they received all this on the 19th. They held a listening session on January 7th. We had a full room, curtain open. I think we had about 25 speakers that night. So they took public comment for about 2 hours. They had intended last night to discuss this issue again. We had a 4-hour meeting we had a 5-hour meeting without even discussing it. So they tabled it to the next meeting. So at this point, what the task that we've given council as the comp plan team is we need to know what to do next. And we think what that means is you need to tell us which of these tiers or areas are your preferred areas for us to plan for. The other thing that we keep saying is that whether you pick all of them or one of them, it's going to be very important to establish policies that we don't allow rural development in any of these areas. This is the future of Ames, whether it's 2030 or 2060. So one of probably the best outcome of this is you have an understanding of how the city can grow by 60,000 people if you wanted to, and in a variety of ways. So that'll be very useful going forward, whether it's in this next 20 years or not. So we're gonna be advocating that whether you pick these or not, you're gonna have some strong preservation policies that land is always available within our 2-mile sphere, and not make a mistake of saying, okay, we're not gonna build here now, so a rural subdivision can be right next to the city, which would impede any option of us really doing anything again in that area. So that's another thing that they won't be making that decision, but to us, that's the follow-up policy of for the areas they don't pick. So on the 28th, they may make a choice and say, these are the areas that we like. They might ask for more information. We expect that if they don't make a decision on the 28th, they're going to have a workshop again on February 18th. That would be a date that they would for sure give us direction. Otherwise, we start to get bogged down and really behind in moving forward.
So will the pick be geographic or will it also include this tier scenario? So
It could be either. I think it'll be focused on the tiers.
on the tiers.
I think it'll be some combination of picking tiers from more than one area. If somebody was in love with one area, that could be the choice. Just say, I'm all in on the West, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That could be the choice. It doesn't seem like that's the one that's likely to come out of the recommendation at this point.
So what was the overall, I mean, maybe this is hard to summarize, but when the public feedback happened, was there a tone or sort of a major story that emerged from what people were saying?
So I think you have to look at it all,
Mhm.
which gets,
You were here, right?
I was here.
Okay, so you were listening.
I was listening. So it gets really convoluted to say at times what's the total public input.
Mhm.
So we've now been involved in this for 12 months. So if you go back to the first 3 months, it was like, what are your ideas? What is the vision? What do you think is important for the city? So that generally influenced getting to this. Then we had a specific exercise and an online comment tool that was up for 4 months where you could go pencil into any one of those areas what you thought, good, bad, this won't work. Did you know about this? And we had about 300 comments. So that's one person could have multiple comments, but we recorded about 300 comments from people through that online tool. That's available in the public input document that's on our webpage as well. We appended that to that. And so that was kind of a mix. From that tool, it was kind of a mix. I would say there wasn't one area that was like, this will never work for Ames. Probably some more predictable comments like, did you know about this traffic issue? Did you know, hey, this has been a farmland for this amount of time and this family, they're never going to sell. Did you know this natural resources? So some of those things were predictable. All of them had that. But in general, it was pretty balanced about all 4 areas. And then the public comments at the listening session were a little different. You had a mix of people that would comment on a specific area saying, why would you ever grow towards Gilbert? Why would you ever grow east of I-35? You could also have just general comments about you haven't addressed sustainability enough. This is not the right way to deal with sustainability issues. And if you don't remember this, City Council has at this point divided the conversation about climate change issues and sustainability from pursuing the comp plan. We're in process in a separate parallel task to do a greenhouse gas inventory, which is predicted to lead towards a climate action plan. And at the end of 2020, we'll probably have to marry them up. Council could say, pause, stop, don't do this. We want to deal with sustainability first. But for the past year, they have not said that. So it's not a forgotten issue. It is just not the front burner issue of the comprehensive plan process. So we had a lot of comments saying, well, how did you account for sustainability? You haven't, or more like you haven't, rather than how did you? So that was probably a general comment. A lot of specifics about different areas. What's the ag buffering? Just kind of the normal things you would hear on those areas. Did anything else stick out to you?
I think the couple of things that resonated to me, I was listening to it after I listened to the recording. One was definitely the sustainability thing. There was a lot of talk about bringing in like the whole climate change discussion. And number 2 was infill housing.
Yep.
To me, those 2 kind of bubbled up in terms of like these 4 scenarios do not take into account what it would mean when you bring in infill housing and how much you can do infill housing. When you look at that, how does that impact any or all of these? So I think that was the second thing that kind of resonated with me. And I know you've talked about, I think there's something that was done with vacant land inventory. Is that
We did that
right,
way back in March. We inventoried vacant land, which there is very little of. So we didn't bring that directly up as a graphic. That was done previously.
Sure.
So to tag on to a news comment on the infill side, I tried to address at the beginning, but that one reason I brought that up is that did come up. So a separate exercise, again, kind of like this was its own exercise. RDG was tasked to look at, again, not to house a certain number of people, but if we looked at different areas of the city that could be redeveloped, what could you imagine occurring there? So on December 4th, this is the only graphic we have this. So in the middle of the city, you see the blue and the beige kind of just get sprinkled in right now. That wasn't on the graphic before. Those were areas that were highlighted by either RDG or staff as vacant or underutilized land that was kind of infill eligible. Most of it would mean redevelopment, not build on vacant land. Now, the specific ones that are beige, RDG showed a concept for that. And we weren't given a policy of, we need you to achieve 800 people living in this area. How would that look? It was like, what are some ideas that could happen here? So the infill concept is still wide open. I think council's very committed to establishing a priority for these as sub-area plans or something else that's supported by policy, not just a token analysis in the process, but that will be a second level conversation right after we get through these big picture geographic expansion questions. So what I would say is the tenor of that conversation was probably more along the lines of, do you really need this much land? Do you really need to expand the way this is shown? Did you really take credit for or account for infill? And the answer was no, we didn't, as I said at the beginning, because we don't think it's predictable. It's obviously something that's valuable to us and we want to support, but it is not a predictable way to house additional people in the city. Just for example, we've been looking at the downtown gateway site for almost 2.5 years, and there's not a concrete proposal on how to do that yet. There's a lot of ideas, but I don't have a proposal to bring to you yet on how that can work best.
Has there been any conversation yet, and I don't know if there's any appetite for ADUs, duplexes, or densification of existing housing stock?
So in this exercise, no. Different council members have brought up what are the housing policies going to be. So this is, again, more geography related. We have to get the land use categories next and what's allowed in those. So kind of beyond infill, if you're not tracking what we're talking about, is there's the specific areas that could redevelop. And then there's their infill that you could sprinkle into areas by letting people do separate units on their property or maybe adding another unit to their home without having to tear down and rebuild. A little bit different conversation than what's represented on this map. So that conversation will be when we have the topical discussion about the issue of housing choice. And that will be the next issue that comes up, either concurrently with the land use map or immediately following the land use map. Because that's kind of one of the core issues of the whole plan is housing choice, housing opportunity. And what does that mean? Is it really just about perimeter expansion, or is it about what it means to either sustain a neighborhood or add more things into a neighborhood in a compatible manner? So that's to come. It's been mentioned. We have not had a direct policy discussion on what does that mean? How would that work? What could you assume as additional housing choice? Again, would you count on that housing assumption and make a decision to reduce your scope of the plan because you assume that, or would that just, again, be an additive option to the total? So it's starting to get more real. It's not just fuzzy ideas about how do we make Ames great. It's getting into those more practical phases at this point. So we've given some hard information here, and now it's going to be applying policy concepts and translating that into an outcome that we can reasonably predict or give you a range of outcomes from those assumptions. So I'm trying to think back. We probably had one small update in October, but if you don't remember, the format of the plan is to kind of be modeled after Champaign, Illinois a little bit, and how they approached designating areas for growth, but they want to have chapters kind of deal with topics that kind of state a vision and objectives by issue. So there's a land use chapter. There'll be a house, for right now, I'll call them chapters, a land use vision, a housing vision, community character vision, kind of individual visions that should merge together and overlap and be stitched together into one complete package, not silos. But that's the direction we're going, is to kind of look at 5 main topics or themes, establish visions for those, make sure the land use is reflective of that, and then kind of bring it all together as a comprehensive plan that deals with housing and transportation and open space and land use and redevelopment, and all of those things will come together as the plan, but they start to overlap. The housing one is probably the biggest piece at this point. How is that going to overlap for new growth versus existing city?
Do you think the sustainability piece will run through all of those
think it-
chapters,
I
or
think
would
it
that be
has to.
something separately?
So as RDG would say, is some level of sustainability is baked into all of the concepts. Is it advocating for one particular sustainable attribute or goal? No, but it is trying to incorporate as many best practices as possible in these assumptions. So that'll be inherent. I think it's still open that some very strong or clear sustainability goal gets put in now. It's definitely an open door that there'll be a space reserved for that idea to come back into the plan once the kind of the greenhouse gas inventory and the discussion of what does sustainability mean to Ames on a practical level. Once that conversation happens, it can be brought back. So one of the issues is if we push pause now, which we can do, about sustainability, is that was not asked as a question of the community directly. So fundamentally, we never said to anybody in the public, do you believe that if we establish this sustainability goal, that should be the basis of the comp plan? And that's kind of the question that's out there by some of the comments on January 7th, is you need to make that kind of a statement and plan from that. Instead, we said, what are some of the things, along with multiple issues, what is your values about different sustainability issues? What's your values about economic development? What are your values about growth or housing choice? We put in a bunch of things that you could comment on, not like one clear, is this the thing you want to define the plan on? And I think that's kind of that's one of the big conversation points is the plan multi-aspect, or is it going to be singular with results that affect multiple things?
When is the inventory supposed to be done?
Early spring, I'd say probably April. I think that's when it'll be available to the public. So they were hired, I think they were hired in December, and they're working on the task right now.
And so this won't be wrapped up then for a while yet, it sounds.
So if we're a little behind now, if depending on how this gets stretched out to make a decision, we had hoped to have a draft comp plan so you could kind of see the skeleton of all the topics and how do they start to come together with a land use map in April. I would say that's a little suspect now that we're kind of chewing up all of January and probably part of February just to get to a land use map. So it seems like we're pushing out, highly likely to push out past February to have a complete draft. And then that would, again, we've always said all along, or not, at least since this fall when council decided to go after the greenhouse gas inventory, that they would overlap quite a bit through 2020. So that's my update. I think the commission is more than welcome to debate amongst yourselves, ask more questions. If you have any particular issues you want to communicate to the council as a commission about priorities or things that you think are good or bad and what you've seen, they're open to any input at this point. So you could either, and I didn't set it up as like a decision-making item for you tonight. I think that would be up to the commission if you wanted to agendize that and go through some kind of discussion and actually take motions about a commission recommendation. That would be up to the commission to choose to do that. I'm not going to force you to do that or put you in a position where you have to make decisions. But it's, again, council's looking for input. They're trying to get as many people that are interested in this to come say something as possible.
just how much control does Ames really have? Like on the growth up north, isn't that more developer driven than Ames driven?
We always have absolute control because you need city utilities to serve it. So the current policy for north growth is it's okay, but only if 100% paid for by developers. So there's a financial constraint to that. Only so much can be done if you have to bear the full burden of infrastructure costs. And we've seen people do it, right? We've seen quarry estates being built. We see Scenic Valley being built now. Friedrich Properties is trying to annex another piece and see how that works about development. But it's a tough one to carry. Those other areas north of 190th Street are highly unlikely to happen without, again, the city won't necessarily pay for it directly, but find a way to assist in those extensions occurring and looking for reimbursement, especially the traffic
The
improvement.
city can absolutely control, how do I want to say it, the rural subdivision
Within
development.
2 miles of the city, under state law, the city can say, we can't say no to a subdivision, but we can say it's only approved if you install city infrastructure. So most rural developments don't want the cost of building city streets, city water and sewer, and then not being able to use them.
Well, the water would be Exira.
Still have to meet city standards. Xenia does not meet city standards. So there's a duplicative cost that most development can't bear if they were expected to meet city standards and county standards. If they could afford to, they could, and then we couldn't say no. But then you're putting a lot of money into a rural density at 1 unit per acre. You can't carry those costs. You need urban development to pay for urban infrastructure. So just the financial constraint would be enough. And that's been pretty clear for a long time.
But the purple up there up north, that's right at the Gilbert city limits, isn't it?
Sort of. They don't currently reach 180th Street. If you were to pull up the fringe plan map is the extraterritorial area between that we have a joint agreement with Story County and Gilbert for planning in the county. Their planning area reaches 180th Street, but their city limits don't currently reach 180th.
So there's a mile north of there that's still
It's about a half mile now.
half mile.
So Hunziker annexed land on the south side of Gilbert last year. They're doing a residential subdivision there. And it's roughly the south boundary of that's roughly a half mile from 180th Street.
But that's outside the 2 mile limit for us?
Well, in the 28E, I'm just looking at it. In the 28E, we said that would be Gilbert's. We would never contest anything that's touching Gilbert north of 180th Street. So it wasn't a debate about whether, it doesn't touch the city. We couldn't have annexed it if we wanted to. So they would have their own 2 mile rights. But if it's closer to us, it's our rights. If it's closer to them, it's their rights. So that 180 to 190th Street is kind of split equally between Gilbert and us.
But if Gilbert drives south, like
Gilbert
they're doing,
doesn't have the ability to serve 15,000 people. They might be able to serve a subdivision or two, but they do not have the city municipal infrastructure to do a large expansion of population from our understanding on the upgrades that they've recently made. I don't see it as a competition for that space. It is a question that comes up is if we don't do it, would somebody else do it? And do we have to live with the results?
that's what I'm wondering.
It's a reasonable question. I don't know that you know the answer to that. I think that that would be a long way off before that could happen because neither Gilbert nor Ames has infrastructure sitting there ready to be built upon. And neither of us are really interested in rural development happening between us.
Wasn't there also an ag preservation zone?
So in the fringe plan, it was basically a neutral zone. There's a 1 mile swath where nobody will do anything. That's between 180th and 190th. No, nothing shall be approved by anybody.
7th parallel.
As we await to study what the consequence of allowing for something to happen there would be.
Because I think, wasn't that like highly contested the last time the fringe plan was put together and had to be added?
It probably
After
was.
something.
I obviously wasn't here when in the 06 to 010 timeframe. That's not a thing, 06 to 2010 timeframe. But that was part of that agreement, that neither of us would look at that as a prime area for expansion.
The developers had a lot of input at the meeting so far.
I wouldn't say that. Hunziker Companies came on January 7th and just positively said that they like the idea that there's flexibility in multiple choices, not just one area that they had to find land to build in. That was
Okay.
the only real comment they made at this point.
And I take it down the color coding. Tier 1 is the easiest.
Yep.
Tier 4 is the hardest.
Yep. And the way that was broken down was really what are those easier extension, low hanging fruit that you could do rather than have to build a $10 million or $20 million project and not know when someone's going to use it. So if you go into the presentation, it breaks it down into a lot more detail by each piece, how that works. So this is just the general matrix of what was the idea behind this for RDG and HDR when they put this together.
And the city is planning, when they put in infrastructure, they're not just looking at what's going in there right now, they're looking ahead to, so they don't have to dig up the things, make bigger sewers like Des Moines is doing now.
So can't say yes to that. Prior policies said the end of the world is here, only build it to here. I don't think the next comp plan will have that attitude. So Hyde Avenue is the easiest example. Hyde Avenue was built as a minor residential street, not as a collector arterial street, because there was never going to be growth north of that neighborhood. So now we can very clearly see the consequence of that decision. That road is dysfunctional in the future. It is not built for the amount of development that would need to use it. It's a major flaw in the north growth analysis. And it comes out very clearly.
Where's Hyde? I can't think of it.
Hyde's the north-south street that leaves Ames, that turns into the county road that got paved, that goes straight to the schools in Gilbert.
Oh, okay. That's what they're calling it now, okay.
Yep. So Hyde Avenue was in the city. When we annexed it, then that county section up to 190th Street was named that. So very, very clear example of prior policy said it's never going to happen. We don't need to size it for if it happens. I don't think that'll be the outcome of this. That's why I'm saying these 4 areas are very important, because they show whether you choose to do it now, that it may or may not, it's likely viable at some point in the future. And therefore you should plan for what needs to be there to support that if the future council thinks that's the best way to do it.
And Hyde is turned into Grand Avenue, whether we like it or not, going up that way.
Not really, because that's the problem, is you're lined with single family homes,
Right.
and I don't think anybody would do that. It's not the same volume as Highway 69, but I understand the analogy is similar. It would be a volume that you would not normally see on a residential street with front facing driveways. It's an issue. So there's one of the fixes, and whether it wouldn't fix it. One of the diversionary investments is to build a grade step through the Rose Prairie property to go over the railroad tracks to get to Stang, to try to divert 6,000 cars around Hyde. That's an expensive fix, and it doesn't fix it. It just diverts it and makes it tolerable on paper.
And that's what I was asking, the planning for the sewers, to make sure they're big enough for the future or traffic also.
So that analysis, those sewers are in place, right? We're working off whatever size of pipes are in South Ames. So the analysis that was done, this was one of the bigger details that we had to get to, was if we connect to that existing system, can we support it? Or does a new trunk line have to be built? So our analysis did take that into account. There are limits. We did highlight some sections that might, depending on how the city grows, how industrial development works, an upsizing of a section of sewer may be necessary. And in reality, the east industrial area and the east growth trigger a full new trunk line extension that runs directly south to the plant to serve that.
That we talked about the other day, or a couple of months ago.
Yeah. So that was validated in this process. So that was a $20 million cost to do those things. And that would serve full build out of all the industrial plus probably 25,000 people. I mean, once you make that investment, you've opened up a huge amount of land that's usable. It's one of those things where it costs a fortune to get the first house, but its value in the long run is tremendous. That's the hardest thing to do for a city, though.
So when did council decide to, since they didn't get to it last night, I shut it off. I was listening to it for a while, but
Did you get through the first 2 hours?
I made it to about 10:15
Oh, okay. I was still here.
amongst doing other things. But so were they going to do take this up at a workshop? Is that what they were talking about? I don't know what was.
It'll definitely be on the regular agenda on the 28th. And then what they do from there, I'm not sure. So it's possible if they don't reach resolution on the 28th because of budget issues that are around, they kicked it to no sooner than February 18th.
Okay.
They could make a decision on the 28th though, if a majority is ready to move forward.
There was some conversation in that Jan 7th meeting. I think maybe it was the mayor who was talking about if at all there was possibility to put some kind of framework to help act on. Is that something that you're considering?
So no, because we so sort of, but no. So the reasoning is that the majority of the council has not said these are the values that we have adopted to review this by. So there's no, again, the council is the steering committee and they're the city council. So they would have to, as a council, say, this is the ranking system we want to apply, staff go apply it for us. What we did instead, because there's multiple interests, is we gave them a memo that said from RDG's perspective and from city staff's perspective, there's about 10 different major considerations. And which one you would personally weight at a higher level than another, that's a council person decision. So the things that we said that they should think about in the memo were to think about, again, infrastructure capacity and cost. So what's the cost to serve? That should be a factor, but not just low cost. You should value what do you get out of it, not just the low cost isn't always the best choice. So to think about value, not just low cost. What kind of externalities, what kind of negative externalities happen from growth? Does it affect sewer utilization that you may wish was available for something in the future? And that came out in that analysis that certain growth competes for sewer capacity with industrial growth. So you kind of got to balance them depending on which one occurs first or what the users are, may or may not trigger an improvement in the future. So those are the kinds of things you should be aware of. If you prioritize one thing over another, then maybe you don't pick that scenario because you think the other thing's more important. From an environmental review perspective and sustainability attributes, the only real direct greenhouse gas emission thing that we tried to give a flavor for was the vehicle miles traveled. We used that as a proxy for greenhouse gas emissions associated with automobile traffic. So we viewed the energy consumption, the water consumption, all of those waste generation, all those kind of big sector issues that go into greenhouse gas emissions to be equal throughout the community. There wasn't an obvious reason that you would have less emissions associated with those issues from north, south, east, or west than you would from just living in the city anyways. So the only one that we said was uniquely attributed to geography was the travel. So we did evaluate which version of this would have more miles traveled, cause more delay in the system, which would then cause more emissions through inefficiency, essentially. So that's there. It's a very rudimentary metric, but it is the only one that we came up with. So if you adopted an energy efficiency policy for the city, it would apply citywide. It wouldn't matter if you're in east or north. It wouldn't matter if you were in anywhere in the city. It'd just be equal. So we didn't have any calculations for that. But to take into account floodplain risk, take into account natural areas, things that you know might want to be better off as a rural situation rather than surrounded by development. Could you facilitate community improvements that would be valuable? Would there be a way to open up space that would be useful for maybe we're going to need another large community park as part of this. This is thinking of that. Where would a large community park be beneficial to not only new growth, but to the community? Are there other things along those lines that would be kind of large community assets that might be facilitated by growth? If we didn't say there was one that was obviously better for that. We think based on public input, a diverse development pattern complementing Ames character is important. How do you weight that? How does the transportation system work? What are the transit serviceability options that go into this? What are the walking, biking, trail connections that work or don't work in these different areas?
Is the future transit service sort of accounted for in the, I haven't looked at it. very
It's
closely. Is
not.
that accounted for?
It's not because it's viewed essentially as a budget issue. So we've adopted a complete streets policy. So whatever we build in these major areas will accommodate bus, it'll accommodate bike and walking. So whether you run a bus here or not is a question of how much subsidy you're going to put into the budget for SciRide. We'll definitely reinforce areas with density so that if the bus was there, you're more likely to have riders. We would advocate for a pattern that is useful for getting from jobs to residential and vice versa. Now it's obviously very centric about university service. So it'd be a different thought process for SciRide. Like take East Growth, for example. Completely different idea about where you live and where you work. It's a relationship to East Industrial and to the existing industrial along Dayton. It's not about going to work at the university. Not that you can't, but that area would be better served by people that have a much shorter commute and be accessible by transit. Well, we have no transit pattern that does that now. So for SciRide to say, oh yes, this will work or not work, we don't know, but we can set it up to work if they can afford the equipment and the operations. So that's where we've kind of left it with SciRide. So we can and we might, we probably will with the land use plan that comes out. We can calculate cost to serve. So some of those routes would definitely be longer than others. One thing we pointed out is in North Growth, the travel time from Tier 3 to the research park or to East Industrial is way out of expectation that anybody would use the bus to travel on that. So it's really hard to, even if you put density out there, it's very hard to believe that people would use transit to get anywhere. So in our eyes, some areas are more likely to be served successfully by transit than others. And there would obviously be a cost that goes into providing that. But SciRide did not have necessarily a specific, this is how we do it. This would be the best for us. Some of the other issues were how does it fit in the market? How does it fit in the regional context about maybe having people commute in and out of the region, not just how do you come into Ames, but what's your market position and what's your competitiveness with regional needs. And then one that we keep pushing on is don't just think about 2040, think about 2050, think about 2075. Does this set up a pattern that you think fits the city in the very long term, not just for the next 20 years? So those are some of the things. There's a few more other issues on that paper. We thought that kind of captured the essence of what is really on the table here, but people are going to bring individual values to those issues. So we weren't given direction to create a staff generated matrix of this is more important than this. So at this point, there is no matrix that's going to get created other than this bulleted list for council to think about. So I'll always put that up there if that's what you're wondering what that is. As I was reading off of that instead of my paper.
So given that we do not have a next PNC meeting in time before the council meeting, what would be most beneficial or useful to how council makes its decision going forward? What can we do here that would be most helpful to the council?
Well, I think they're looking for insight into any of the tiers or scenarios, depending on how you want to look at it, as being beneficial to Ames. Is there something that people believe is missing in the analysis that would be a big, hey, you shouldn't make a decision, or this would be the wrong decision because you didn't address this issue yet? I think those are they haven't said that, but to me, those are the two big things that they need to grapple with on the public comment side. Some of the details, right? Like exactly what goes into these areas, that's not on the table yet. So it's more about how do you feel this would fit assuming we do everything else right, does this fit in Ames? Does this work? Is it cost effective? Does it meet our long-term interests? Does it sustain the community and allow it to grow?
Would that need to come from this commission then today? Is that the urgency?
It's a big ask.
Yeah.
It is,
well,
because it is, and I understand that. That's why I didn't set it up that way for you, because honestly, when I put this on the agenda, I didn't even know what the schedule would necessarily be going forward. I just knew council would talk about it again yesterday. And now I know they'll talk about it in 2 weeks, but I still don't know what's going to happen. I think the other thing you could think about, I think that's a lot to ask of you because you've had zero discussion.
Yep.
It's a lot of information. Council didn't make a decision after hearing about it in 1 hour either. They've been wrestling with it for 4 weeks almost at this point.
So we needed to hear from the council before we can, they
I
need
would,
direction.
I would say opposite. They're looking for
They
your
all had
opinion.
emails.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, you're free to individually email. I think if there was a consensus from the commission, that would be of interest to the whole council.
And we can go on the 28th and speak on the issue.
That's right.
You could.
Yep.
I think the other option is on February 5th, if you really just wanted to discuss this, even if there's no other agenda items, you could probably have a reasonable discussion in an hour, maybe have some motions come out of that. If they didn't make a decision on the 28th, then you'd be in position to transmit a commission opinion to them for their final deliberations on February 18th. So you could hold out for that. If they don't make a decision on the 28th, there's clearly enough time to plan for the meeting on the 5th to allow you guys, if you want to discuss it further and have motions. I kind of leave it to you guys on how you want to wrestle with this. So I want to turn it over to you guys. I think you guys should talk amongst yourselves about if that's important. Is it an individual issue? Is it a commission issue? I think it would be beneficial at some point for the commission to kind of stake out majority opinions so the council knows you're the only other organized group that looks at this. Everything else is individual participation.
What's the council's schedule? When do they want to land the plane on this?
Well, based
Whenever
on
it
what,
happens.
just based on what the mayor said last night, discuss it the 28th. I think he believes there won't be a decision until February 18th. There's no guarantee that that's the case, but I think based on his comments, he's assuming it's a conversation one more night and a decision another night. But that said, it could be done on the 28th.
So if we scheduled a meeting for this commission on the 5th, it sounds like there's a chance.
Seems like there's a reasonable chance that input would be timely.
I think your point about having one or several statements from this body as a whole is far more powerful than anybody showing up by themselves.
And it would be,
So meet on February 5th with only this item.
I believe I don't have to put anything else on there unless something shows up in our office like in the next 5 days.
Can we as a commission say, you can wait? We could table it that night. I guess I'm just trying to say, hey, we've got an important thing.
It's,
Let's,
This is
Yeah,
priority.
yeah,
if
let's
it's
just do
over-
this. And
if it was overly complex and not necessary, I would not put it on that meeting. Let's put it that way.
so, or if it was rezoning some ag land to general industrial
It was
kind of thing, we can.
It was a simple, straightforward thing that needed to get done on a schedule
Yeah.
that I know you guys would deal with in a short amount of time. I don't have it right now, so I don't know what it
Okay.
would be, but again, I already told you, I'm trying to keep stuff off.
So
just
what,
because.
what we could have for the February 5th meeting would be maybe minutes of the discussion from council. Is that something that we can get, or should we just pull it
They
down ourselves?
probably won't be done from the 28th. The
Okay.
minutes from the 7th
18th? 28th, you're right.
and 28th. The city mayor's office, the city clerk does not turn minutes around that quickly.
Mhm.
Plus, it needs to go to a council meeting to be approved. So minutes from the 28th won't be available to you.
But the
Video
recording
is
will
up.
be.
The recording will be up the next morning.
Okay.
And obviously, I can summarize I can summarize what I hear in a memo to you on Friday in advance of the meeting. It just won't be the minutes.
Yeah.
But the minutes from the 7th will be done if you really want to see public comment. They'll be done and posted before February 5th. So I think, again, it might take an hour. I think if you are willing to commit an hour on February 5th to discussing this item, I think you can make some headway. It seems like an hour and a half would be more than enough time to
Don't jinx.
get some issues
Yeah.
out.
What's everybody think?
I think
important.
It's a good idea.
I
City's
think so.
spending a lot of resources on this, and
Yeah. I would highly.
and I agree with what Carlton said. I think our voice carries some water with the people that sit here on Tuesday night.
I agree.
So I'll if you're committed to this, I'll let the mayor know that the commission is intending to bring it up as a
Great.
discussion item and forward some comments to them from your February 5th meeting.
And the February 5th meeting is going to be over there.
I think it's in 135 downstairs. Maybe it's in a 35 somewhere. It'll be in 135 because they usually use 235 for setup for the budget meeting. It'll be downstairs.
I guess if there are some really pressing issues or concerns or opinions that we have, it might not be a bad idea to send a note to council before the January 28th meeting. Just in that far
You mean a written-
scenario that, no, I'm thinking individually.
Individually.
Oh.
Because if for some reason the council does end up making decision on January 28th, then the very big concerns are sort of captured. Not, that likelihood is very slim, but if at all anybody has some big concerns, might not be a bad idea to send.
Our voice as a citizen at that point.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Is the 28th meeting, is it a workshop or an
A
actual?
regular meeting.
Okay, but this is going to be open discussion on this topic again.
It'll be set up just like it was last night. They originally thought they were only going to take public comment on January 7th. That's why they had an extra meeting to
Okay.
not clog up the other items.
Right.
But the mayor decided that it's an important issue. So if somebody had not spoken before, they could come and speak at the next meeting. He didn't want repeat speakers, but he would take additional comment from those that have not participated before. And then the expectation is that the council would discuss amongst themselves. What didn't happen on January 7th was any kind of a robust discussion about individual priorities or values to help council understand where other people stood on the issue. So I think that's the idea on the 28th is if there's any more people that have something to say now, hear it, depending on how long that takes and what comes out of that, have council maybe express some opinions about things which may or may not result in a motion on something. And if it doesn't, then for sure on February 18th, they have to make a decision.
Okay.
Otherwise the schedule's already gone, but a whole new schedule has to come up.
Well, we can send to the council that we are going to be meeting in February.
Yep, I'll let them know that that's
And-
the intent.
And that the intent of that meeting is to discuss the 28th.
Well, it's not to discuss the 28th meeting, it's to discuss
That's,
this packet of information
Right.
that's out there.
that'll just be summarized in the meeting, and we'll
Right.
come up with our bullet points that we believe council needs to address.
So the only thing I'm going to give you for the 5th is a short memo reminding you that this stuff's all on our webpage. So if the public's looking for it, they know where to find it more than you guys. And then just give you some sense of if more comment was given on the 28th. And then if I'll go from there. If they take direction, I'll probably talk to you, Matt, and see if there's, I don't want to leave you guys out because I think there's a lot of stuff to talk about. And I feel sometimes just the way the meeting order goes, you kind of get stuck with, well, am I supposed to be talking about something that's upcoming or something that happened? I think the commission has a great responsibility of this was one step forward. It's not the decision. So think about that. So even if you don't have a meeting on the 5th and it's a meeting in February, maybe you want to start to talk about some of these other issues that are going to be coming up and express opinions about the housing policies or some of the land use components that are going to go into this. When we define those land use classifications, that's a big deal. That sets minimum density, that sets housing types, existing city and new growth. Those will be big things that regardless of geography, I think you guys will want to look at too.
The one thing I would, if I were staff, that I would certainly urge is that soon the council come to some decision-making principles what is most important as they make decisions. You've given us a long list. It needs to be a list of maybe 5 principles ranked.
So we're not going to do that. We're not going to tell council.
I know
what should
that,
be.
that the council needs to be urged to develop those decision-making principles just as a way to help themselves.
Or they'll be doing that forever.
Yeah, otherwise they're just going to be going in circles, in my perspective.
And that's up to them to decide.
Yeah, I
I mean,
understand.
they've brought it up. They have not chosen to do that.
Okay.
So whether they
That's
should
my
or
answer.
should not, I don't know. That's just where they stand.
Okay.
Maybe that's the answer on the 28th is that's what they want to do. And then they'll make a decision on the 18th of February. I don't know what they're going to do
Okay.
exactly.
Not that I don't want to hear from the public, but is there the possibility with a public forum that you could end up with a large crowd here and a 3-hour meeting?
Seems highly unlikely just because council's been so available for this in January. I would think not. You didn't see anybody here tonight
That's true.
to express anything to you.
And that was on the agenda.
It was on the agenda. So I felt like if somebody had a reason that they wanted to come talk to you about something, you would have seen somebody tonight. It seems it seems odd to me that you would have 3 opportunities to directly speak to council and then you choose to come to the P&Z for the first time.
Well, or come again.
Possibly. I think you would have been here tonight if that's what you thought. But hey, anybody can show up.
Yeah.
But you don't have to let it go on for 3 hours either because it's not a public hearing.
Okay, good.
Okay.
you.
So we got a plan?
Everybody cool? All right.
Happens.
Commissioner. Doug?
Nope.
Nope.
Staff comments. Kelly, you got anything else?
Well, Eloise has a career accomplishment of getting short-term lodging adopted for the city of Ames. So guest lodging, Airbnbs are now possible to happen in the city. So that went into effect in December. We have 16 applications for the whole house Airbnb version that is pending. So the ZBA has a 5-item agenda for the next 2.5 months, trying to work through these things, plus whatever else comes in. So we had to go to the ZBA and say, you need special meetings to get through this all. So we're knee deep in vacation lodging requests right now. Council goal setting, be interesting. Saturday is their second part of a 2-part effort to establish new goals for the new council. So that'll be also an interesting outcome from them here in January as they start to again keep going forward on the comp plan. What other issues either relate to the comp plan or are other things important to the city? So that'll be interesting. Often we get tasks as the planning department, which will eventually filter through you related to those items. So I'm sure you'll see a Tribune article on Sunday about what happens on Saturday. So look for that. Obviously, things that are important, I'll let you know about what might be upcoming. But comp plan's number 1 priority. So we're not looking for huge tasks related to other issues right now. I think we had last night, there was a request for an annexation to be initiated in South Ames. Council tabled that request at least probably for 2 months to let them kind of sort out the scenario issues a little bit further and kind of see how they think that piece of land fits in the future. It's currently in an urban service area. Current policy would say it should be annexed, but they wanted to wait and get through this initial step of the comp plan a little bit more. So there's still a lot of activity out there on different levels, and it seems to be a pretty active start to the year so far for our department anyways.
Okay. That's it. We're adjourned.
Okay.
Plus.